How's it going, Idan? It's really great to finally get you on the podcast, or I guess maybe again, right? Because we tried this before, and a couple weeks ago, and Israel became under attack, and the internet was not cooperating very much.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks, Joe, for having me for the second time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Not many people come on a second time.
Yeah, it is. It is. But this is our life. Life of a
Yeah,
startup is hectic. So, we're used to it.
yeah, yeah. It's like it's that mentality of, well, I don't know what I don't know, but I also won't know until I start. Like it's like a
Absolutely.
vicious circle. Yeah. Well, Idan, why don't we start with, how you got into tech, right? So you're from Israel, right? So obviously you probably made your way into the Israeli military, as everyone from Israel does.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering about before that time period. Were you already interested in tech? Were you already inclined to go, a technical route? What was that looking like?
It's an interesting question, by the way, Joe. No one asked me that question before, and I'm getting into a lot of interviews lately. TLDR, I started programming when I was, I think, 6. When my father back then bought me a computer, and I think it came over. Like from that moment, I fall in love in a computer, and I was a technical person from the beginning, from the early days. And yes, I served in a cybersecurity unit at the IDF called Matzo, and I was there around 4.5 years plus. After that, I had my own consulting services company. So I did a lot of penetration testing, security code review, risk assessments, custom development for large enterprises, on the security side. And as part of, a casual pen test, which was,
So you were talking to me about how you figured out how to steal the NTLM hash of a device, and then you were able to use that to escalate and pivot throughout the environment. So if we want to start there, and then also, why don't we take maybe just a step back? What's the NTLM hash, right? Why is it important? Why does it matter in Windows systems?
so NTLM hash or a Kerberos token is actually the identity of the user or the machine. If you're able to steal that, you don't need to know the password of the user or the password of the computer to be able to move laterally across the organization. And this was a very, very back then sophisticated attack. We all know, Mimikatz and all APT attacks, the Mimikatz tool, of course, and the amazing person behind it. And TLDR, this led me to a research and a patent back then to profile and identify abnormal behavior of users and machines inside the network. Back then, we founded a company called Erato. We were pioneers in the UEBA space, sold it to Microsoft in 2000 and like December 2014, January 15, we were at Microsoft. Was amazing ride. Um, at Microsoft, I was the GM for software engineering, running product, research, development, and data science. I was running the Defender for Identity business. So that's it. It was like, from zero to not zero, from $1 million to 460 in 3 years. It was an amazing growth. With Microsoft, sounds easy, but it's not. But I think that now, Microsoft and CrowdStrike are the biggest companies, cybersecurity companies in the world that are leading the abnormal behavior identity stuff. They also, like CrowdStrike, also acquired company back then. And I was fortunate enough to, to meet Satya in person. I reported to two people under Satya Nadella. So I had two one-on-ones with him. I learned a lot about the business, and like moving forward at Microsoft, I felt kind of a very interesting challenge or a pain where, from a startup where you used to deliver code to production on a daily, weekly basis, and now you need to fill up risk assessment questionnaires. You need to go through 10 different scanning tools on your code. You need to go through threat model, pen tests, security reviews, compliance reviews before you ship code to production. And this was a huge pain. Another pain that we faced is when we found risks in production or in runtime, it was very, very hard to attribute it back to the code owner or the code component in our code base. And TLDR, this what led us to leave Microsoft and found Apiiro back then in 2019, 2020. And back then, no one knew what we were talking about. What does it mean, ASPM, application security posture management? Why do you need another technology to scan code and protect or understand your software architecture and then expand it to software supply chain and provide a comprehensive platform that allows you to secure your software from design, development, and delivery in one, risk engine or one platform. So this is my story in a nutshell.
Yeah, I'm sure, one of the biggest challenges probably at Microsoft at any level that you're at within the company is just the red tape and the processes and the procedures that you have to follow. I'm currently at a pretty large company, and I mean it takes you a year just to decide what you're going to buy, and there's other divisions, right, of this same company that takes them 3 years minimum. Like if they go 3 years of testing products and whatnot, like that's them moving quick, right? And it's weird, right? Like I feel like you're not even a technologist to some extent anymore, right? Because by the time you make a decision on the product, maybe the players in that space change, right? Maybe the products that you were testing had major issues with. Now, because this process is so, regimented, you have to start over. You have to start completely over. You can't just plug one in and move forward, and I'm sure that's probably like one of the internal, downfalls at Microsoft too, right? Is where
Well,
it's like you
I,
really only move forward.
I think that on the security side, Microsoft is more, build versus buy. And I don't think this is the issue. We solved that in Apiiro because we serve around 10% of Fortune 500 companies. Okay. We solve this problem by one, providing a seamless integration. You need read-only API to your source control manager. That's it. And you can deploy it fully on-prem in an air-gapped environment or hybrid, or you use our SaaS offering, whatever. But from the moment you connect us to your source control manager, in 1 hour, and this is the core intellectual property that we've built, we developed a technology called DCA, Deep Code Analysis, where we scan the entire history of your code base, and then we translate code into entities. Like, for example, we know, I would say components, like we know all your APIs in the code, all your GenAI usage, all your, technologies, security controls, exit points, and then we map it on a graph. And the aha moment is where you can tell me, hey, Dan, no way. I didn't approve my developers to use a bouncy castle from this version, or I didn't approve them to use Spring Security for, you know, input validation or or authentication. And then you get visibility to your software architecture for the first time. All the other scanning tools out there will scan for OS top 10. We developed a completely new technology that fully understand your software architecture. And now, if you want to connect all your existing tools into Apiiro and contextualize their findings or their noisy findings and match it to your software architecture and say, okay, it's great that I have SQL injection or log4j or secret in code or whatever. But you know what? It's not in a code module with PII, or it's not deployed, or it's not a high business impact application or stuff like that. And I think this is how we overcome all the barriers uh, of going through very, very large enterprises that are paying multi-million-dollar deals to Apiiro today, but we did it in a small chunks. You can start small and grow with Apiiro, but the unique value prop is just to tell you, hey, Joe, this is your software architecture. And the only way to know that is questionnaires or manual security reviews or other self-based attestation processes that will you say X, yes, I don't have PII, and tomorrow you do have PII in your code base, and no one will actually identify that in a continuous manner. So I think the value prop plus a very seamless, easy, with short time to value, this is how we overcome, and of course, all the security controls that we have and the regulations that we put in place and on and on. But this is how we overcome the burden of going through a 1 year evaluation process with large enterprises.
Hmm. Yeah, a lot of people don't understand or they don't realize how big of a problem this actually is, right? And I'll give you an example. In my environment right now, right, and I've been in other environments where this is the exact situation where you really don't know the third-party libraries, for instance, that are being used in an application, unless your developer specifically tells you or you have a way to call them out on it, right? There's no way for you to know. You don't know if they're outdated, if they're vulnerable to something, right? That you're opening yourself up to a new attack that you don't even know about, right? And with how cloud applications are nowadays, you need, 4 or 5 different tools to actually secure your pipeline and your code and make sure that we're not using AI models in ways that make us, vulnerable to different attacks and whatnot. These are huge problems.
I think,
One real world.
sorry,
Sorry.
Joe. No. I just wanted to say before you move on, I think that the problem is much more complex than that, because everyone are looking at their attack surface in silo. You are now telling me on open source. But if I will tell you, listen, this open source is actually using a secret, and in the same code module, you have API that expose PI data or an API that sends data to OpenAI surface. Without understanding your software architecture, you will continue fight the siloed alerts, and you cannot win the battle. You cannot win because you have so many alerts and so many vulnerabilities. You need to contextualize them. You need to first understand your software architecture and only then connect these siloed alerts on top of your software architecture to make sense of them and to understand if they're impacting your business or not, or you have a toxic combination that you need to handle before you need to handle any log4j or any vulnerable dependency, because you need to look at it as a whole and not as one simple alert. And another, like, this is one problem. Another problem is how you identify these combinations early in the development lifecycle before you deploy to production. This is the key, because if you have, I'm so many years in the cybersecurity industry. The AppSec exists for 20 years. And then everyone said shift left, shift left, shift left. And what happened is they blocked developers on every CVSS score 8 and above. But who cares about CVSS score if CVSS does not understand your software architecture? And then what happened? You stop developers and they are frustrated from security. So what we decided to do is to build our own risk graph engine. Okay. The risk graph engine actually takes from the DCA, the deep code analysis, the software architecture, and then from your CMDB, from your 5 different SaaS, SCA, secrets, CSPM, whatever tools that you are using, and combine them together on a graph and say, now Joe opened a pull request and it touches a sensitive data with the sensitive business logic in this code module that transfer money, for example, plus an open source dependency with vulnerability that is reachable in the code. This is why it's a risk to the business. Let's stop Joe at the pull request and provide him remediation guidance, or automatically try to fix that. And when you have this context, now you can actually shift left. So again, it's not only detecting these types of risks, it's correlating the data, it's understanding the software architecture, and only then you can actually block and prevent risks early at the pull request before you start the build process, or after, or at the deployment, whatever. It's too late from my point of view, but I'm just saying everyone are missing the point. They are missing the software architecture. They need to understand. And siloed tools care about CVSS score or EPSS score, and it's meaningless. And then it's just bombarding developers. And again, I don't want to complicate stuff, but you touched on software supply chain. Yes, you need to look at the attack vector. It's a multi-dimensional attack vector. Someone can breach into your source. Someone can breach into your CI/CD pipeline or inject malicious code, like in the SolarWind attack, that actually, they breached one CI/CD pipeline and managed to breach all the customers of SolarWind. So it's looking at your code, and your code is very complex because it's assembled from first-party code, third-party code, secrets, open source dependencies, third-party technologies, SDKs, and then make sure that you have all the coverage of the testing tools and processes, and then making sure the CI/CD pipelines are secured. And then you have a holistic application security platform from the design phase, which we will talk about in a second, to the development, to the delivery. Makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I was going to get there, where we're diving into the actual architecture, right? Because actually, I've experienced this, personally, right, where there was a potential, event, right, and we were looking at an application. I didn't even know how it was designed, right? Where is it pulling the data from? What is it actually doing on the back end? Why is this, a critical production application, right? And there's literally one person at the company that is able to tell me that. God forbid they go on vacation or something, right? Like, that's how it was, and now I'm over here creating the first like architecture diagram of how this application runs,
I think
especially in
it's,
the cloud, right?
I think it's,
Yeah, like
sorry,
especially in the cloud where people can, just so easily deploy new applications, new architectures, new patterns, right? Using new services in AWS, Azure, GCP, than are what are, even previously approved and whatnot. Like they can do those things and you'll have a sprawling infrastructure that's well beyond what you even think that it is.
totally agree, but I want to differentiate between software architecture to infrastructure or cloud architecture. Okay, these are totally different inventories, totally different relationships, totally different components, totally different diagrams. Now, yes, if let's say an application in Java, okay, is it you developed your RESTful APIs in Spring Boot, and one of the APIs is reading or storing data in the storage bucket. Yes, you want to know that. And you can know that today with our DCA, with our deep code analysis, only from scanning the code, okay, without scanning your cloud architecture, okay? But what I'm trying to say is that the software architecture looks totally different from your cloud architecture, and you need to secure that before you deploy to the cloud. And the challenge is, you said you are building the diagram, but the diagram will change tomorrow. How do you keep updating the diagram for every code commit that is material? Like, I don't care if my developer change the background color of the login page, but I do care if he exposed a new data model in the API of the login page. Yes, absolutely. Immediately, I need to trigger a pen test or a security code review if the data model contains sensitive data. And I think this is what the industry is missing, because it's, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's more structured when you open or enable a new service in AWS, or a new storage bucket, or a new firewall rule, or a new IAM rule, or whatever. You have all the CSPMs that will identify, or the smart ones will also, prevent that, or have segregation of duties with two approvals. But if you're a software developer, we'll add a data model to the API that is responsible for the login page in the UI. No one will know. No one. I promise you. And this is the gap that we are solving in Apiiro, with our ASPM platform that is powered by the deep code analysis technology. We are telling you the developer all committed the code to your code repo. It's a material change that require a pen test. Automatically trigger it without asking anyone. The policy is defined in Apiiro with your risk threshold and risk appetite. And if you pass this threshold, you have gates. At the design phase, we scan Jira tickets or feature requests, okay? And then we stop you from going to the development phase without Joe doing a threat model on this feature. If you open a pull request or commit code to your feature branch, we will stop you because you committed a material change or a risk based on your software architecture. If you're going to release your artifacts, we will stop you and say, Joe, you pass these and these and these policies, okay, which are a graph-based policies across uh, um, multi-data stores, from code, CMDB, and runtime data, and more and more. And this is where, you put the gates before you ship to the cloud. Now, to your point, if you already, if you shipped Log4j 3 years ago, It wasn't warnable. And today we found the 0-day, then you need to attribute this to which pipeline, when it was deployed, who approved it, is it went through a pen test or not, and who is the code owner that actually imported the package, who did the review on the pull request, and automatically open to this developer, if he's still in the company, open a pull request to fix it. And this is exactly what we're doing with code to runtime matching, attributing code components like APIs, open source dependencies, PII fields, authorization logic, and others to the code owner.
Yeah, all of those are there. It's like it's close to impossible right now without that sort of technology. And it's a situation that I encounter very often, actually, of where someone builds something that maybe throws a vulnerability scanner alarm, right? And now we got to add context around it. You have to have someone, really, it's a couple people getting on a call and talking about why it matters and why we should care about this one module or this one snippet of code, right? And explaining that to the dev and then going through the whole process again, and hopefully it passes this time, right? Like without that sort of singular solution, yeah, we have like 4 different tools to tell us different things.
Yeah. So again, 2 problems. One, how you consolidate all the findings and contextualizing them, and who you should talk to. And the second problem is, again, just aggregating the data and finding the code owner will not be effective if you don't know your software architecture, because you have so many alerts. And without understanding the software architecture, you don't know how and what to prioritize. I do want to say just one step back. You said something interesting. I don't know when you're going to publish it, but next week we are announcing, unfortunately in an anonymous way, we closed the largest deal in the ASPM market ever with Fortune 10 company. I can't say which one, but it's one of the biggest companies in the world. Why? Because they managed to quantify what you just said. We managed to quantify how many man hours they're investing on every alert in runtime, how many hours they invest, by the way, invest when they find it in runtime, how much time they invest to triage, prioritize, and then find the code owner to fix it, because the security team cannot do that. And then how much time they invest on risk assessment questionnaires before releasing to production. We actually, and I'm going to share, my marketing team are going to share the metrics and the data behind it. So you will be able, and your audience can go and see exactly the parameter of how we calculated it with the customer, and what is the total cost of the cost reduction that we managed to prove to the customer. So I feel like I felt the pain that you are talking about at Microsoft. So I can connect to your day by day, Joe. And yes, it's a painful problem, and I'm sorry, I'm like a broken record. And without understanding your software architecture, you literally cannot do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, without even, being able to put numbers to it, like you mentioned, right? You can't even really start to like quantify how much work goes into just this section of your business that's probably not even noticed by upper management, and like you said, when they start seeing how much they're actually putting into it, it's like, wait a minute, like we're blowing money right now. This solution over here is cheap compared to what we're actually putting into it. We need to, refocus and refactor and, free up some time for these, highly paid engineers, highly paid developers to go and do the work that we need them to actually do to make us, a Fortune 10 company, right? Like to make us the best in the space. Like when you start quantifying it like that, it speaks volumes that you wouldn't be able to do without it.
Yes, and think about an AppSec engineer, which needs to understand code, which needs to understand developers' mentality and processes. You need a cloud security engineer that deeply understands AWS architecture, and you need the developers to care about, because they have sprints. And the developers, you need to understand them. They want to hit their target, and their target is to deliver high quality features to increase the business. So the business will grow. If you will keep dealing with security issues again and again and again, you will not deliver value to the business. And it's a vicious cycle. So you need to prove as an application security engineer, I'm telling you, we as a company, we are a big company, we are involved with the smartest AppSec engineers and developers in the world. And we built, I think, the most, sophisticated AppSec program in the market at the moment. And the reason why we did it, because we proved in a quantified manner how much effort you need to invest in every sprint in security. And if it passes the 5%, you're done. Go out. You will impact the business in a negative way. So because of the risk-based prioritization, because of the understanding of software architecture, now you compare ASPM platforms, you say, hey, this ASPM platform, reduce it by, 25%, and Apiiro managed to reduce it by 85%. Pure business outcome. And this is why developers love, eventually, they're not using the Apiiro UI, but they're getting the Apiiro bot into their tool chain. If it's GitHub, if it's Jira, if it's Slack, if it's Teams, whatever, to help them prioritize and fix their risks with simple explanation of why this will impact the business. So TLDR, we have a built-in business outcome report where we show to your upper management two metrics. Development velocity goes up, risk goes down before releasing to the cloud. And that's it. And this makes sense because finding, as you said a minute ago, to find talent of security engineers, it's so hard. To find a partner on the software development side, it's so hard. They are very logical people, and they're focused on delivering value, high quality software with less bugs, functional bugs, and with less security bugs. And this is how we bridge the gap between these teams.
Yeah, it is. It's an interesting challenge, but from what you described, it sounds like the old the term shift left, right? You can't get any farther left than where you're sitting, right? Where you're able to inject yourself into the process.
Exactly. And we just released two at Black Hat. When Black Hat, I don't remember.
August.
2 months ago, we released, after working with so many customers as design partners, we released our risk detection at the design phase. So think about this. Your product managers are, requesting features day in, day out. And no one actually, you have so many product managers, and you cannot hire more AppSec engineers, and they cannot go and search in Jira or whatever, wherever you open the feature request, based on keywords. So we developed our own LLM model. It's a private model, not based on OpenAI or Hugging Face or others, that can actually, based on understanding of your software architecture, scans the text and say, hey, Joe, this is a risky feature request. And why? And automatically generate threat model stories based on Stride with contextual mitigations because we know which authentication framework you use in your software architecture, and we know which encryption framework and input validation. So if you requested an integration, I don't know, with Facebook and send through the API these fields, we will tell you, hey, use Spring Security for input validation because the threat can be spoofing or information disclosure as part of Stride, and we do that automatically. This saves tons of time and detect risks that without this automated process, you would never identify. So we cover our customers at the design phase, at the feature request phase, at the development phase, commit, pull request, and at the build and deploy phases before you release to the cloud. So these are the intersection points where we put our guardrails, our risk-based guardrails in the development lives.
Yeah, that is really fascinating. If you were to project out, say 5 years, where do you think this space is going in 5 years with the, heavy use of AI growing, right? The usage of these LLMs and whatnot, that it's only going to grow from here. And it's
It's
probably going to grow exponentially quicker than what we
it's
expect.
already growing exponentially. We just released internally a report that proves that every customer that started, and again, there are two sides of the coin in AI. In a second, I will describe, but we looked at the numbers, and every customer that enabled Copilot or any other AI-based code assistant, their code, the amount of grew exponentially in the last 6 months. This is a report that we generated internally. We are thinking about how to anonymize it and maybe publish it externally, but it's not an assumption anymore. It's de facto, this is the data is showing it. So, but there are two sides of this coin. Why? One is you using AI for faster development. Two, it's you as a developer, same developer, using AI to make your software more or smarter and more efficient. Like if you now go and embed OpenAI framework inside your Java application, someone needs to identify it, someone needs to govern it, someone needs to make sure you comply with all the requirements, and someone needs to trigger a pen test or a security review or a compliance review in an automatic, proactive way. And this goes back to our DCA, the deep code analysis that identify the software architecture, automatically map all your GenAI usage in code, and then trigger a process based on the policy. Now, I do think that both will introduce complete new attack vector. Why? Because if you're a VP engineer, okay, VP software engineer. Now, Joe wakes up tomorrow and enabled a Copilot on your GitHub repo. Who knows that you enforce 2 reviewers on the pull request? Who knows that your code changes are now growing exponentially, and maybe you will not introduce vulnerabilities, but you will introduce a major material changes to the architecture, and no one will know that because the Copilot decided to use a different serialization framework, and new serialization framework will open you to a completely new attack, and your SaaS tool will do literally zero because there is no SQL injection in this serialization framework, but it's a material change and no one knows about it. So what I'm trying to say, again, to make it shorter, it will open in the next, not 3 to 5 years, in the next year, completely new attack vector. We will see totally different types of attacks, and you need
Hmm.
to automate everything. Automate
Yeah.
everything. Without the automation, and when I say automation, it's not just, workflow in an orchestration tool. It's actually, sorry, broken record. It's actually understanding your software architecture, the changes of your software architecture early in the development lifecycle, and then trigger a contextual process. It can be contextual threat model or a pen test or a security review, but also a training. Because if Joe did the same mistake again and again and again, 5 times, I don't need to wait for, the 1 year training, which is so boring and everyone press next, just to comply with PCI or whatever. I need to trigger a contextual training to reduce the risk before delivering to production.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We're moving into a really fascinating time where, new threats are going to be creating new attack vectors, and it'll be really interesting. So I'll definitely have to have you back on, sometime in 2025, and we'll talk about the new ones that are coming up. But, Idan, unfortunately, we're at the end of our time here, but, I really enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise. Thank you for having me, Joe. It was an interesting conversation. I would love to talk more in 2025 when we see the new attacks that are raising.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Idan, before I let you go, how about you tell my audience where they could find you if they wanted to connect with you, and where they could find your company if they wanted to learn more?
Sure. So LinkedIn, Twitter, or x.com. Just add me and send me a message, or just go to Apiiro, APIIRO.com, and reach out.
Awesome. Well, thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode.